Sandinistas.
These men sing of fighting for freedom and of winning. The words of their Spanish folk song tell of defeating the Sandinistas of Nicaragua and of driving their Cuban allies into the sea. The tale is of heroic acts of war. It encourages all those who live in these camps along the border of northern Nicaragua. These people belong to the Nicaraguan Democratic Force, or FDM. They're better known as Contras, counter-revolutionaries who've spent the last 3 years fighting to bring down the Nicaraguan government. The Contras are at the center of the conflict raging in Central America. The American administration which supports them calls them freedom fighters, men and women who will turn Nicaragua back from its communist path. The Nicaraguan government says they're enemies of the revolution, people being used by the United States to drag Nicaragua into a costly and damaging civil war. The United States Congress, several thousand miles away. It's here on Capitol Hill that the future of the Contras is to be decided. The Reagan administration's new term of office has fired up the debate over U.S. policy in Central America. At the heart of it is the government's covert operation, funding the Contras to fight the Nicaraguan government. The policy has become highly controversial. Evidence of direct CIA involvement in the Contras' activities last year brought the policy into disrepute. Congress objected and refused to give Reagan any more money. Banking on his personal popularity, the president chose his State of the Union speech to declare firmly that he now intends to take up the cause of the Contras once again.
The Sandinista dictatorship of Nicaragua, with full Cuban Soviet bloc support, not only persecutes its people, the church, and denies a free press, but arms and provides bases for communist terrorists attacking neighboring states. Support for freedom fighters is self-defense and totally consistent with the OAS and UN charters. It is essential that the Congress continue all facets of our assistance to Central America. I want to work with you to support the democratic forces whose struggle is tied to our own security.
It turned out to be the opening salvo in a major new campaign. Official comments painted Nicaragua as a communist menace and the Contras as the saviors of democracy. A public battle for $14 million of aid had begun. The Reagan administration, like its predecessors, calls Central America its backyard. It sees the region as vital to America's security and views the Sandinista government in Nicaragua as a particular threat. Reagan has always seen revolutionary Nicaragua as a troublemaker. He says Nicaragua exports revolution to its neighbors, Honduras and El Salvador. Nicaragua used to provide arms to left-wing Salvadorian rebels. 3 years ago, the Reagan administration started a process to halt the flow of arms. It began to assert its authority openly in its own backyard. The American government's first response was to step up its own military presence nearby. A series of exercises has taken place in and around Honduras for the past 2 years. These were part of Big Pine 2 in 1983. New maneuvers on land are currently underway and will build up along the Nicaraguan border in the next few months. The USA also used its ties with Honduras to set up and direct a covert war against the Nicaraguan government. In short, Honduras soon became America's forward base, the center of a military operation aimed at putting pressure on troublesome neighbors. But such a swift military buildup had a price to pay. Relations between Honduras and Washington have become tense. Honduras now wants guarantees that thousands of well-armed Contras won't be based permanently on Honduran soil. There have also been protests in Managua. This one outside the American embassy included Americans living and working in Nicaragua. protest reflected the feeling in the capital, and particularly among Nicaragua's leaders, that the Reagan administration had all but declared war. The two governments spend much of their time raising the alarm. Nicaragua accuses the U.S. of preparing to invade, but has also made several new peace proposals. The White House called them propaganda, but then agreed to meet Nicaragua's president. National elections last November brought an expected victory for the ruling Sandinista party, but that didn't change Washington's view. Reagan called the elections a sham. Many other countries, though, regarded them as largely free and fair. Those who attended the inauguration of Nicaragua's new president in January were promised a new dawn of peace and national unity. The ceremony took place in front of the Cuban leader, Fidel Castro, often regarded as the Sandinistas' spiritual father. President Daniel Ortega used the occasion to hold out an olive branch to all opponents. He said he wanted good relations with the U.S. and toned down his usual criticisms. An amnesty was offered to all Contras fighting against the revolution. Away from the ceremony, there was little for the new president to celebrate except the sheer survival of the revolution. The economy was his top priority. 3 years of war have cost the country dearly, more than $250 million last year alone. Ortega's first move was to scrap state subsidies on food prices and to devalue the country's currency, the Cordoba. It's part of a complicated set of measures aimed at getting rid of the black market which has thrived in the last few years. The plan is to fill up the empty shelves with consumer goods and put an end to the rising prices, the inevitable outcome of severe shortages.
¿Cómo se dice la gente de Matagalpa? ¿Cómo se llaman? ¿Cómo se dice? ¿Matagalpeños o algo así? Matagalpino.
As long as the war against the Contras continues at its present rate, there's little hope for the economy. Coffee and cotton, the country's main produce, are both badly affected. Coffee plantations have become a prime target for the Contras. Normally, the coffee crop provides a quarter of the country's foreign exchange earnings. That figure has dropped sharply, making it more difficult to finance the country's huge import bill. To add to the difficulties, those who normally harvest the crop have been conscripted into the army. Foreign volunteers have taken over their jobs.
Oh.
The Sandinistas' war against the Contras has fluctuated in the past 3 years. The Contras made their biggest gains in the middle of 1984, penetrating deep into central parts of Nicaragua. Now, with less money behind them, tactics in the war have had to change. The Contras make fewer, but more selective strikes. This ambush on a Sandinista convoy took place last November, several days after the elections, a gruesome reminder that the Contras were still a force to be reckoned with. It's a reminder, too, of the casualties of war. The civilians had no affiliation to either side in the war. They were caught in the middle, traveling with a military convoy, despite warnings by the Contras not to do so. These pictures and the statistics behind them are the grim reality of the war. The official figures say the Sandinista army lost 1,000 men last year, and the Contras 3,000. As many as 2,000 civilians have also died. The Contras can still inflict great damage on the Sandinistas. It's likely that with or without more aid, this type of operation will continue. The greatest threat to the Sandinistas comes from the Nicaraguan Democratic Force, the FDN. They are the largest of the Contra groups. They're based in a network of camps along a 20-mile area on the Honduran border. Leaders of the Contras estimate that they have 14,000 armed fighters and say the numbers are growing. They admit that the lack of American aid in the last 6 months has seriously hampered their activities. They say it's altered the logistics of the operation, but not affected their will to fight. Less money has meant all supplies are stretched to the limit. There's nothing to spare in either clothes or weapons. But the Contras say they still have the military organization and the popular support needed to defeat the Sandinistas. To demonstrate their popularity, they point to the number of volunteers joining up, 500 a month. And that, they claim, is only half of those fleeing across the border from Nicaragua each month. People who the Contras say are opposed to Sandinista rule. Many of those who end up with the Contras have deserted from the Sandinista army.
Porque no me gustó el sistema en que trabajaban, las anomalías que hacían.
This young woman explained that she changed sides because she didn't like what was going on in Managua. She said the authorities sent her to infiltrate the FDN movement. Her mission was to kill one of their leading commanders.
Sí, yo me uní con FDN y anduve con el comandante que me dijeron que me matara. Anduve con él 9 meses combatiendo. Pero al ver que todo era mentira lo que me decían, que el FDN mataba familias y todo, entonces yo mejor dije la verdad. Porque yo nunca estuve consciente pues con el sandinismo. Yo estaba con ellos porque ellos me oprimían, me decían que tenía que trabajar con ellos a la fuerza.
Lack of funds has forced the Contras to cut back on their military operations. Only about a third of their armed force is now active inside Nicaragua. That's way down on the number this time last year. The Contras claim their raids are still effective, but in 3 years they've never been able to hold onto any territory permanently. Each active task force is made up of 5 or 6 men. This one is on a particularly important mission, to guard the direct supply route from the border to their fighters inside the country. Perhaps the most noticeable change since covert aid from America dried up has been in the supply of weapons. Not only are grenades, mortars, and ammunition running low, but the means of getting them to the task force inside Nicaragua has changed drastically. In the past, the Contras relied mainly on Belgian-made rifles and American submachine guns. Most of their ammunition was for these types of weapons, but now that too is running out. Countries friendly to the Contras are believed to have stepped in to help. Supplies from Israel, Venezuela, and Guatemala are said to be ending up on the Honduran border. Under the CIA-funded operation, the Contras could count on supplies being flown in to their positions inside Nicaragua. That too has changed. Now the weapons have to be carried in from the bases on the border, a walk that takes at least 8 days. Commander 42, as this task force leader is known, explained that the rest of their arms come from whatever they can capture from the Sandinistas. With a major offensive now underway in the north, Commander 42 proudly displayed some of the weapons they'd seized 2 days earlier. He said the Contras had routed 200 Sandinista soldiers from a nearby ridge at Chamuscada. The battle had gone on for 2 days and was a significant victory for the Contras. He added that they expected the Sandinistas to return in greater numbers and probably retake the ridge.
Así que por muchas ofensivas que lancen no podrán hacer nada.
This arms haul had brought in 7 82mm mortars, along with several mortar shells.
No, aquí estoy en barranco.
Huge quantities of ammunition and grenades were found alongside a special anti-tank weapon. Four light machine guns and 3 Russian-made AK-47 rifles, complete with 30,000 cartridges, were also there. Overrunning the Sandinista post had also given them supplies of food and clothes. And perhaps more importantly, it had lifted morale at a time when the Sandinistas were reported to be moving some 60,000 troops and heavy armor up to the northern border. Commander 42's patrol met up with a task force which had been fighting deep inside Nicaragua. They just come from a skirmish, but appeared relaxed. They swapped stories of battle. 30 to 40 people a day are getting killed as a major offensive builds up to try and flush out the Contras in the north.
De los cigarros piricuacos.
¿Cómo estamos? Ya le miramos los primeros, miramos 5 muertos que llevan de arrastrar. Ok, le ya van a sacar más muertos, puta,
While the Contras wait for more money to come, they're spending their time on a vigorous training program. New recruits spend several months being molded by some of the Contras' toughest leaders. One such commander is Mike Lima. He's well known for the stories he tells of daring exploits in the early days of the war. He now stays at the base where he puts volunteers through a crash course of basic guerrilla warfare.
Prepárense para el asalto. ¡Ah, el asalto! ¡Qué barbaridad, hombre! ¡Qué barbaridad! ¡Qué hueva! ¡No ha salido! ¡Qué chimita! ¡Termotato, verga! ¡Qué bárbaro!
Leaders like Lima may be respected by the people they train, but they're hated by the Sandinistas. The links of the FDN leadership to the former National Guard that kept General Somoza in power discredits them totally in Managua.
Preparado para asaltar, pues. Preparado. Cuidado, cuando yo diga, ustedes gritan comando, ¿vieron? Cuando yo diga el asalto, ustedes gritan comando y se tiran encima con todo el huevo.
There are other problems as well for the Contras. The FDN here is only one of the 3 main groups opposed to the Sandinistas. The 3 factions are deeply divided. Repeated attempts by Washington to encourage Contras to form a united front have so far failed. The signs are that with U.S. military support for the Contras in trouble, there will now be new pressures on the Contra leadership to become a political alternative to the current Nicaraguan government. The Contras are also fighting an increasingly poor image abroad. Their methods have been questioned following reports of massacres of civilians. They're often depicted as a group of mercenaries with bandits and common criminals among their ranks.
Todavía la propaganda sandinista continúa diciendo que ustedes son una banda de criminales que continúan a matar civiles y todo dentro de Nicaragua. ¿Qué es su respuesta a eso?
Todo lo que ellos dicen es una propaganda falsa. Ellos han perdido credibilidad ante el pueblo nicaragüense y nosotros tenemos el apoyo del pueblo. Sería un suicidio cometer actos que vayan contra la población civil, siendo nuestra principal base de apoyo.
Como ustedes no tienen mucha munición y todo eso, ustedes no tienen la gran mayoría de la fuerza adentro, ¿no? Ustedes actúan con una cierta porcentaje. ¿Ustedes creen que cambiará si ustedes habrán más municiones y eso?
Sí, nosotros tenemos confianza en que vamos a captar más ayuda, no solamente la ayuda que estamos esperando del gobierno americano, sino de otros países y algunas instituciones u organizaciones privadas. Nosotros confiamos en esa ayuda. La escasez de munición o de pertrechos va a demorar o a prolongar un poco más la guerra, pero esta guerra no va a detenerse en ningún momento.
One result of the lack of funds from Congress has been an increase in money from private sources. Several American organizations sympathetic to Reagan's line are known to be raising funds for the Contras.
Where'd he go?
A few individuals have even joined the war effort. They provide mainly non-military help, but are staunch supporters of the Contras' cause. This American medical worker is from Mobile, Alabama. He believes the USA should be more directly involved in Nicaragua.
The government, well, let me say what the feeling of everyone here is. They should just, the U.S. should invade and just get it over with quickly, because I think one way or the other, the government is going to have to, the present government in Nicaragua is going to have to be gotten out of there. And they're either going to spend a little bit of aid over a long period of time for the Contras, or they can get it in, go in and get it over nice and quick.
Members of Congress from both parties take a different view, and according to the latest opinion poll, so do the American people. 70% oppose involvement in attempts to overthrow the Sandinista government. When Secretary of State Schultz went to Capitol Hill to plead the government's case for funding the Contras, he got a tough response. Congressmen objected strongly to America's heavy-handed approach. An alternative to the covert operation was urged by Representative Jerry Studs.
My frustration, Mr. Secretary, obviously is, can't we do better than this? Doesn't the President have something more exalted to ask of us than that we provide military aid to a mixed group of mercenaries and thugs and Democrats seeking to destroy a wretched regime in a poor country that has known nothing but repression and civil war since our own Marines landed there to defend freedom, presumably as freedom fighters, and the Monroe Doctrine 7 decades ago? Don't we have the power to contain this little country through the use of defensive military force? Don't we have diplomatic tools? Don't we have allies throughout the region who can encourage political liberalization? Can't we come up with something better than the continuation of an expedition that embarrassed us for 3 years without producing the slightest change in Managua? I suggest, I think, I hope, that funding for the Contras is dead in this Congress. It isn't a crusade, it isn't a bargaining chip, it isn't a fight for freedom. Can't we find some policy that we can all agree on through all the diversity in this committee, in this Congress, in this country, that has a chance of success and that all of us in good conscience can support, and that makes it crystal clear to all the world the difference between the way the United States acts in the world and the way our totalitarian adversaries act? Surely the struggle for freedom should be something more than a contest between their terrorists and our terrorists.
The American government believes it has already explored all the diplomatic alternatives in its policy towards Nicaragua. Its response to Nicaragua's latest peace proposals has been cool. U.S. officials believe the Contras are the people to bring true democracy to Nicaragua. They say support for them in arms and money is the only way to put pressure on the Sandinistas to stop alleged oppression. The start of President Reagan's second term has brought a renewed determination to win support for that policy. Reagan has described the Contras as Nicaraguans who've been left out of the revolution. The Sandinistas say they're the guardians of the Somoza legacy, a time which brought universal suffering to Nicaraguans. They want a political solution, an end to the covert war which is bringing so much hardship. But the Contras show no sign of letting up. And whether their cause wins in Congress or not, they are determined to fight on, knowing at least that their cause has support right up into the White House. As the political debate hots up in Washington, so too does this protracted guerrilla war.
Anda, cuando tomé la colina, manden alto a todos. Alto, levantando la terror, echándose la cara, lavándose las manos. Vamos todos a la victoria, FDN. Vamos todos a la victoria, FDN. Vamos todos a la victoria. Van los comunistas y van los sandinistas.